Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This is a story of how patience is key, and how letting someone else get revenge for you is by far easier than doing it yourself. The setup: I live in one of those doubled-up houses where they build two homes adjacent to each other with mirrored layouts, so we share a wall but are otherwise completely separate. For years, the house next to me belonged to a nice old lady who you never really noticed or had any trouble with. When she died and the house was resold in early 2024, the troubles began. The target is someone who I will refer to as Mike Torres, for reasons that will become clear later. Mike owns a sizable construction business and does some real estate on the side. He buys the house and rents it to a bunch of foreign construction workers that work for his business. I say foreign because it's relevant to the story. There are rumors Mike is doing some shady stuff to have these guys work for him dirt cheap by claiming that they're national workers in their native country and paying them according to that wage, not the much higher minimum wage of my country. Not exactly on the up and up, possibly unreported labor as well. Anyway, he stuffs 4 to 6 of these workers in the house next door for them to live while they work here. Now, I don't have anything against foreign construction workers, but these guys living next door have two traits that are very problematic. They are extremely loud and they do not give a damn about anyone else. We're talking non-stop music and partying starting Thursday evening throughout the entire weekend until they leave at 5 a.m. Monday morning to go to work. Seriously, I don't know how or when they sleep. It is literally non-stop. We're talking I'm wearing headphones but still cannot hear my own sound over their music loud, since it would appear that they've designated the living room, adjacent to the shared wall, as the party room where the fun happens. At first, I do the neighborly thing and just suck it up, thinking it's just one party, just one weekend. After the third one in a row, I go over to ask them to turn it down, since, night disturbance is technically illegal when music is this loud, hearable on the street and across the street by my other neighbors who have also complained. I knock on their door one Friday night around 11 p.m. and a guy with bloodshot eyes opens up. The music is blasting behind him. "Hey, I'm your neighbor. Could you please turn the music down a bit? It's really loud in my house," I say, trying to sound friendly. He gives me a half-hearted nod. "So sorry, we'll fix," he says with a thick accent. "Thanks. I'd appreciate that," I reply, hopeful. Except nothing changes. I go over several more times, each time angrier, each time met with variations of, "but it's not loud." During my fourth visit, I'm practically shouting to be heard. "Look, if I can hear your music in my own house over my own TV and music, I would say that it is, in fact, too loud." The guy shrugs. "We just having little fun. Weekend, you know." I contact Mike, since he is their landlord, and explain the situation, after which I'm met with an abrupt dismissal. "Listen, what they do in their free time isn't my business," Mike says over the phone. "I rent them the place. That's where my responsibility ends. Sorry, not my ducking problem." Basically, Mike told me to get lost, so I involve police and call them every time things get out of hand. After about a dozen calls between February and April 2024, sometimes even twice in the same night, it is clear that even regular police interference doesn't help the situation. I should mention that I am a lawyer, so I know what the next legal steps are. I also know that other than a token paper from a judge saying their music is too loud, I'm not really going to get anything. Things would, like they already sometimes had, become a cat and mouse game where they would blast their music extremely loud to piss me off or to wake me up for a few brief moments, so that by the time I could get proof or police show up, there would be no music. I'm deadlocked with my only further option being pretty useless and a waste of time. At this point, I'm biding my time and just waiting till something changes. I'm not saying that I condone people who bludgeon their neighbor to death with a rusty pipe, but I do somewhat understand what would drive someone to that point. The mistake. One day in May 2024, I'm at home working remotely when I notice quite a lot of ruckus next door, more so than usual. Suddenly, I see through my garden window that a wall is being partially torn down. You see, sometime over the years, the previous owners had built a small adjacent side building adjoining the main house. It was right on the border between us, and when the gardens were being re-fenced, the wall was used as a divider to save on fencing. Said wall was now in the process of having its top part ripped off by a crane. I was not informed of any of this, which, while not technically needed, would have been the nice thing to do. I go take a walk so I can take a look at what they're doing and see that they've torn down the entire side building. The remaining wall between our gardens is the only part that has been kept intact, and even then, not the top part. Being a lawyer, and specifically a construction permit lawyer, I know two things. Crap like this is not allowed without a pre-approved permit from the city. There is no way in hell they have said permit, as I would have seen the application for it. I regularly have to check the online public accessible by everyone application to see what permits are being applied for my job, and when I do, I tend to look over to my own area, just so I can keep up with what is being planned in my area. This is it. The moment I have been waiting for, the situation has changed, and the time has come to exact revenge. A quick email sent to the municipal authorities lets me do my civic duty of reporting a potential crime. The fact that someone is building or demolishing stuff without a permit. Since this is a simple report, no response happens since I'm not an official victim or anything yet. Since no further construction happens for a few days and everything was removed, I assumed that was that and they would only tear down the side structure since it was starting to fall apart due to age. Neighbors have moved all their stuff that was in said building onto their lawn and haphazardly covered it with a tarp. The next week, more construction materials are being delivered and construction starts. I send a new email to city services with new pictures saying that apparently there is more planned and that I hope they undertake the appropriate action. Instant response less than an hour later. They'd called Mike after the first time to inform him that what he was doing required a permit, and he had assured them that he didn't know that BS, he's in construction, of course he knows, and that he would stop construction and request a permit. They called him again after my email, reprimanded him for not following his earlier promise, and he said again he would shut it down. I happened to be working from home that day and had to stop myself from waving to the construction crew as they left. Later that day, I get an angry phone call from Mike. "You reported me, didn't you?" he shouts without even saying hello. "I don't know what you're talking about," I reply calmly. "Don't play dumb. The city inspector mentioned they got a complaint from a neighbor. You'll be sorry, I'm coming after you for damages from these delays." I take a deep breath before responding. Even if I reported you, which I'm neither confirming nor denying, I wouldn't have done anything wrong. From the looks of it, you didn't have a permit and should have known better than to start working illegally without one. I end the call before I start to sound too happy with things. Mike has at this point no idea what I have initiated. He is Mike Torres, and I have just rung the bell that awakens the Kraken that will destroy him. He just doesn't know it yet. The Kraken. You see, there is a good reason why most people consult an expert and/or a lawyer when they want to apply for a permit. The rules involved are so convoluted and needlessly complex that navigating them as a non-professional is extremely hard and time-consuming, and a single mistake can torpedo your entire case, forcing you to do it all over. I have killed entire projects and have seen clients' projects killed by pointing out that on page 127, section 35(1)A, something was left blank that should have been answered. I did some digging and found out that the previous owners of the houses had actually consulted each other about the side building and agreed on making the wall part of the divider between their gardens, so much so that they shared the costs of it and the ownership. That wall that he destroyed part of, it was also my wall, which of course means I'm entitled to damages, but that is not the important part. The important part is that he needs my permission to do anything to that wall. So when he applied for a permit a few weeks later in June, added bonus, rowdy neighbors' stuff is still out in the open, covered by just a tarp, since they expected this to be a quick smash and replace job that would take a few weeks at most. I went to the city center and looked at the application. I noticed that they were planning to do some stuff to said wall that I own 50%. So I filed a complaint, following proper procedure, about the permit, namely that even if granted, it could never be executed since Mike needed permission from me in regards to the wall and he didn't have it, nor was I intending to grant it. This should kill his permit since permits cannot be granted if you know in advance they cannot be realized. No sense granting a permit to build a certain kind of house when you know they're never actually going to build it. Now, Mike was a bit of a smooth talker, and as a construction entrepreneur had his connections, and permits are a political decision here just as much as a legal one. So despite a 100% correct legal objection that should have killed his permit, it went through. He actually called me about it to gloat a little. "Hey neighbor," his voice dripped with satisfaction. "Just wanted to let you know my permit got approved. Nice try though." "Congratulations," I replied flatly. "I'm sure you're eager to get started." "Damn right. Your little complaint didn't amount to much, did it?" "We'll see," was all I said before hanging up. "No worry, one can appeal a permit in my country. The only requirement is that you pay a €100 fee, which I gladly paid. The appeal instance is a subnational instance and does not care one bit about Mike's political ties or the half-hearted nonsense that the city officials wrote to justify granting the permit in spite of the concerns I raised. They terminate his permit without any hesitation on the aforementioned legal grounds. Mike sees his permit blocked until he fixes the issue, which he can't, because I'm not really inclined to agree with his plans for our wall, you see. At this point, going through 2 lengthy procedures, it has been over 7 months. The neighbors have had an unfinished construction project in their yard the entire time, forced to store their stuff elsewhere. Something that was always supposed to be a temporary thing for a few weeks while we build, turned into something that was taking months with no end in sight. But wait, there's more. The above was the administrative part of the matter, him getting the permit. Now, doing construction work without a permit is also a criminal offense. And of course, my report got passed around to the appropriate instances, so now Mike was also the subject of a criminal procedure for construction offense. Not only did he risk fines and jail time, he was a construction business owner and used his own construction business for the work he did on the property. So his company was also on the hook, and one of the sentences that can be given in these types of crimes is to be prohibited from doing construction or construction-related activity as a business, either permanently or temporarily. Not only was he personally on the line, his entire business was as well. During this debacle, Mike tried to sell the property. This didn't really go too well because of a few reasons. 1, the property was inflicted with an illegal situation. The demolished side building was torn down illegally, and until said illegal status was resolved, it would stick to the property, which tends to kill the property value quite a bit, since nobody wants to buy something that they'll have to spend time and money on to make legal again by either rebuilding the torn down building or getting a regularization permit for it. Made even worse by the fact that he applied for said permit and had it denied, so he couldn't even claim that said permit would be super easy to get. Secondly, Mike never intended to sell the property in its current state. What he, as I now know, has done in the past is buy cheap old houses like the one next to me. He put some of his crew in it, who can't complain about the subpar accommodation. They trash the place because they don't care, and he lets them. Then when the place is done, he tears it down and sells it to a developer or develops it himself. However, due to his construction crime and the accompanying status for the property, Step 2 was not an option. He couldn't renovate it the way it needed to be. Small renovations would not be enough, because covering the crime was always a requirement in any permit he would request for the building, and because of me, he couldn't cover it. Couldn't sell it either because the place was trashed, and any developer looking at it would dip out when they realized there was a construction issue and a vocal neighbor who would oppose anything big that they would try to do there. Lots of easier properties to develop than that one. In conclusion, anyway, that is where we are today in October 2025. Mike is staring down the barrel of a criminal court procedure that is about to happen where he is risking his business and livelihood. His existing projects also gather special attention from city services now, since he is now outed to them as someone who cuts corners on permits and regulations. He cannot really sell the property unless he cuts a massive loss, since in its current state it is absolutely trashed. He cannot develop it or sell to a developer because all development plans involve the adjoining wall, which he cannot use in big ways unless he gets my permission. The rowdy neighbors are stuck living in a smaller house than what they had, in a place they trashed, but that cannot really be renovated or fixed in the major way that it needs. They have quieted down a lot, possibly because Mike blames them for his current situation, which isn't wrong, I suppose. Last week, one of them approached me while I was gardening. "We sorry about the noise before," he said awkwardly. "Boss is very angry about the wall problem." "That's unfortunate," I replied, carefully pruning my roses. "He say it's our fault for making you mad," he continued. "We try to be quiet now." I just nodded and went back to my gardening. I have awakened the Kraken and set it off on Mike Torres, and it utterly ruined him. And the best part is that I had to do very little to do it. All I really did was nudge the abomination that is municipal bureaucracy and point it in his direction, and they did the rest. I could tell you that he called me to complain and even beg about letting him use the wall the way he needs it to so that he can get on with his business and fix the issues and use them to show his good faith in court in the criminal procedure that he was losing money and customers over this and was in danger of losing his entire business, and that I then smugly replied with "not my ducking problem." But he didn't, so for now we'll just have to imagine that he did. The next one is an entitled people story. I've been working as an architect for about 15 years now, specializing in residential design for higher-end clients. A few years back, I bought a property about 30 minutes outside the city. It came with an old barn that had been there since the early 1900s. The barn wasn't pretty by modern standards, but it had character. The wood was weathered gray, some boards were crooked, and yeah, it leaned slightly to one side, but it was structurally sound. I'd had it inspected. I used it for storage and my woodworking hobby. The property was in a neighborhood that had transitioned over the decades from farmland to larger residential lots. Most people out there had an acre or more, and the whole appeal was the rural character mixed with nice homes. My house sat on 3 acres, and the barn was set back from the road, partially hidden by trees. You could see it if you looked, but it wasn't exactly front and center. About 2 years after I moved in, a new neighbor bought the property next to mine. I'd actually designed their house. It was one of my favorite projects, a modern farmhouse style with clean lines, board and batten siding, and large windows. The clients had been demanding but had a clear vision, and I delivered exactly what they wanted. The house was beautiful and had even won a local design award. The new owners were a couple who moved from the city. The wife made it clear from day one that she had opinions about everything in the neighborhood. She immediately joined the Homeowners Association, even though it was basically a toothless organization that met twice a year to discuss road maintenance. Within a month, she was complaining about everything from people parking RVs in their driveways to dogs barking. Then she noticed my barn. She came marching over one Saturday morning while I was working in my garden. She didn't introduce herself or make small talk, just launched right into it. She told me the barn was an eyesore that was bringing down property values. She said it looked like it was about to collapse and that it was completely out of character with the neighborhood's aesthetic. She demanded I either renovate it to look presentable or tear it down entirely. I explained that the barn was structurally sound, had historical value, and was well within my property lines. I mentioned that the neighborhood had no architectural guidelines or restrictions against agricultural buildings. She didn't care. She said she'd be filing complaints with the county and the HOA, and that she'd make sure something was done about it. Over the next few weeks, I started receiving letters. The HOA sent a politely worded inquiry asking about the barn's condition. The county sent an inspector who confirmed the barn was safe and not in violation of any codes. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. My neighbor escalated. She started a petition among the other neighbors to force me to remove the barn. Most people ignored her, but she got a few signatures from folks who barely knew what they were signing. She showed up at the next HOA meeting with a PowerPoint presentation about property values and neighborhood aesthetics. She had photos of my barn from every angle, complete with red circles highlighting every weathered board and crooked beam. The HOA president, a retired farmer who'd lived in the area for 40 years, told her there was nothing they could do. The barn predated most of the houses in the neighborhood and was grandfathered in under any reasonable interpretation of local rules. She was furious. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She filed a formal complaint with the county demanding they force me to bring the barn into compliance with modern building codes. Not safety codes, which it already met, but aesthetic and architectural standards. She specifically requested that the county require the barn to match the architectural style of the surrounding homes. The county sent me a letter explaining the complaint and asking for my response. They noted that while they couldn't force aesthetic changes to a pre-existing agricultural structure, they were required to investigate all formal complaints. They asked if I'd be willing to make any voluntary modifications to resolve the dispute. That's when I had my idea. I wrote back to the county explaining my background as a licensed architect. I noted that I was more than willing to make voluntary modifications to address concerns about the barn's appearance. I proposed bringing the barn into aesthetic compliance with the neighborhood's architectural character by renovating it to match the predominant design style of nearby homes. I specifically noted that the most prominent home in the immediate vicinity was the modern farmhouse directly adjacent to my property. I included detailed plans for renovating my barn to mirror that exact architectural style, complete with the same board and batten siding, paint colors, window styles, and roofline details. I even proposed adding decorative elements that would make it look like a smaller version of that house. The county loved it. They saw it as a good faith effort to address neighborhood concerns. They sent a copy of my proposal to my neighbor as a courtesy, noting that I was voluntarily agreeing to make changes and asking if this would resolve her complaint. She called me within an hour. She was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said I was mocking her and that I had no right to copy her house design. I let her rant for a minute before calmly explaining that I wasn't copying her house design. I was copying my house design since I was the architect who'd created it. The plans were my intellectual property, and I was perfectly entitled to use them however I wanted on my own property. There was a long silence. Then she threatened to sue me. I reminded her that architectural plans belonged to the architect unless explicitly transferred in writing, which hadn't happened. I'd retained all rights to the design. I also mentioned that her complaint had specifically demanded the barn match neighborhood architectural standards, and I was simply complying with her request by matching it to the nearest and most prominent example. She hung up. The next day, she withdrew her complaint with the county, but I didn't withdraw my renovation plans. I'd already decided I was going through with it. The barn needed some maintenance anyway, and this was the perfect opportunity to do it right. I spent the next 3 months renovating the barn. I matched every detail to her house design. Same siding, same trim colors, same style windows, same metal roof profile. I even added a cupola that echoed the one on her house. When I was done, my barn looked like it could have been designed by the same architect as her house, because it was. The difference was that my barn version actually looked better. I'd improved on some of the original details, fixed some proportions that had bothered me in the original design, and added elements I'd wanted to include in her house, but she'd rejected. My barn became a showcase for what that design could be with a few tweaks. People started commenting on how nice the barn looked. Several neighbors mentioned that it actually enhanced the neighborhood's appearance. A couple even asked for my contact information because they wanted to hire the architect who'd designed both buildings. My neighbor stopped speaking to me entirely. She'd see me outside and immediately go back inside. Her husband apologized to me one day, saying his wife had gotten carried away and he appreciated that I'd actually improved the property. The best part came a few months later. A real estate agent contacted me asking if I'd be interested in selling my property. A client of hers had seen my barn and the house and wanted to make an offer. The agent mentioned that properties with high-quality, architecturally cohesive outbuildings were commanding premium prices in the area. I wasn't interested in selling, but I asked what kind of premium she was talking about. She estimated my property value had increased by about 15% thanks to the barn renovation. My neighbor's property value had increased too, simply by proximity to mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd complained that my ugly barn was bringing down property values. I'd complied with her demand to bring it into architectural compliance with neighborhood standards, and in doing so, I'd increased both our property values while creating a better version of the design I'd created for her in the first place. She never filed another complaint about anything in the neighborhood. In fact, she stopped attending HOA meetings entirely. I heard from another neighbor that she'd been trying to convince her husband to move, but he refused because he loved the house too much. Sometimes malicious compliance isn't just about following the letter of someone's demands, it's about showing them that maybe they should have been more careful about what they wished for. My neighbor wanted architectural standards enforced. She just never considered that those standards might include the very house she was living in, or that the person she was harassing might be the one who'd created that standard in the first place. The barn still stands today, looking better than ever, and every time I see it, I smile knowing that it's a permanent reminder to one particular neighbor that sometimes the person you're trying to push around has more cards to play than you realize. The next one is a petty revenge story. I live in Portugal. Here, when something happens at a commercial space, you write in the complaints book. My parents own a business, which means I am fairly well informed about how these things work. I had recently had an encounter at this kiosk with this man, and he lingered at my card checking numbers, names, flipped it over, looking at the CVV. It was uncomfortable. On to the exchange. Me. Good morning. I would like 2 packs of Winston 100's 26 cigarettes. He proceeds to ask me for my card with a hand gesture. Him. It's 12-20 inches. Hand gesture again. Me. I would prefer to insert the card myself. Him. You can't do that. Me. I won't touch the machine at all, only insert the card. Him. Throws the machine down in disbelief. I can't let you do that. Me. Are you refusing service? Him. Yes. I asked for the complaints book. He refused, which legally he can't. But it was just me and him. I wait until another client shows up and ask for it again. He relents and gives it to me. As I open it, I realize I didn't have a pen. You have to write out your complaint. I ask for one, he refuses. I say okay. As soon as I open the book, I see something wrong. The first complaint is completely ripped out, all 3 pages are. The first page is for the person who makes the complaint, the second is a copy for the business, and the third is to remain in the book. Under no circumstance is the third page to disappear, even if it's a mistake and or taken back by the person who makes the complaint, it must remain in the book. Seeing as I had no pen, I start the process online, take the info, and start snapping pictures of the missing pages. As soon as he saw me taking pictures, he does a beeline from around the counter to me and tries to take the book away. I said I have every right to keep this book until I'm done with my complaint. He gets huffy and more clients show up. He goes back behind the counter. The thing about these complaints book is that you write it in ink, but then you have to follow through and submit them online to the proper authority depending on the complaint. But I didn't have a pen. So I bypassed the ink format and immediately submitted online, mentioning the weird analysis of my card, the refusal of service, and as the last middle finger on the duck you sandwich, Steve Hofstetter, if you know, you know. I also mentioned the missing pages with pictures of the missing pages itself, including the business's stamp in the same picture so they can't refute and say it's some other book. Now, because it was online, it goes straight to the authority assay, and you can choose which department depending on the complaint. After an hour of nicotine withdrawal, of looking the business up the pictures and writing the complaint itself, I hand the book in with no written complaint. He opens it, chuckles to himself, and smugly says, "Did you give up because you didn't have a pen?" I say no because I didn't have a pen. I decided to submit it directly online, and as my last mic drop moment, I said I didn't feel comfortable writing it in the book as the first complaint had magically disappeared from the book. The color drained from his face because we both knew what would happen. Even if they don't take the complaint seriously, tampering with the book is absolutely taken seriously, and that absolutely will be followed up and fined accordingly. Then I smiled and said I wish I had a pen and left. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A man stands alone, sits alone, lies alone, waiting for a battle he doesn't know is coming. No Netflix, no QT. Juan prepares for another hot, dry, and dangerously boring day. His mind is his own enemy, or so he thinks. A bevy of dust, a menagerie of living confusion enters the horizon. Juan is under attack. Excerpt from my hot take on westward expansion called How the West Was Juan, a story about a man facing a potential exile from his literal and figurative home, Mexico, Arizona. I truly did think this day was going to go on without incident MC-less as the previous 40 days, and then it happened. I get a message from a parent demanding that I accurately score the final exams I graded for my Algebra 1 class, taught to the upper echelon of 8th graders, along with students whose parents won't shut up about not being allowed to take the course. This is an expected call, in a way. The district I work for gives students a final exam that's 42 questions long. The final is entered as a raw score out of 42, as a final grade, heavily weighted. About 80 homework assignments equals to the same value of the 42-question final. I've been teaching this subject for years, under the same administration, most of the time, and they've allowed me to give some grace during the grading process. This grace comes in the way of not entering a final score lower than a 60%, regardless of what score they received. The only way I score it lower is if somebody just doesn't take the exam. It then has to be a 0. One particular student, Juan, we'll call him, scored particularly poorly on the exam. Juan is the type of student who always puts things off until last second, rarely completing homework assignments, etc. Behavior-wise, Juan's a saint. He's really a good kid otherwise. He just puts very little effort into paying attention to the instruction during class or even showing up. The rest of the class, 90% or so anyway, score anywhere between a 25 and a 35 out of 42. Entering the raw score at a weight of 80% is difficult, but it gets done. For those who score less than a 60% on the test, or about 25 or so, I enter their score as a 60 dot whatever your raw score was. Meaning, if someone scored a 13% or 31% on the test, their score would read 60.13 or 60.31 respectively. I don't advertise this to the kids, but they're aware of the system. I have done this for tests where students truly bombed it. There's no retakes for the finals, however, and Juan scored a 1540 seconds, roughly 35.7%. I entered his score as a 60.36 and went about my semester. His parents saw his grade change significantly. At first, I was unsure how he, who didn't do homework, had his parents thinking he scored an 80% in the early parts of the semester. I found out that he had screenshot a grade from like week 1 and used that to show them. So when the dad called, he said, "You messed up grading Juan's score on the final. You're supposed to be a math teacher, man." He then continued to berate OP pretty handily until I tried to interrupt him to explain the grading process. I finally got to explain that he scored 1540 seconds and explained that the score of 60.36 wasn't his score, but much, much worse. He didn't seem to understand, and no, language wasn't a concern for him. He painted the phone call with many vibrant colors. He finally said to me after cussing me out, "You need to score this test accurately. Change the grade now." Well, seeing where you put it that way. Enter MC. I knew that taking a final grade and changing it from a 60.36% to a 35.71% was going to result in a failing grade in both the overall course grade as well as the obvious final grade. And it did. I took pictures along the way to show how the scores affect the grades. I pressed delete 5 times, then entered 35.71 as his percentage score out of 100. The class being failed became a major issue for everybody. The principal had to get involved to communicate with the parents, with me there to meet as well. And only then did they seem to understand what I was saying all along. Mr. OP was trying to do Juan a favor here. But what it comes down to is that Juan has not proven by any means that he's mastered any of the Algebra 1 content, so he's going to have to retake the course. Juan's dad seemed very apologetic at that meeting. He wound up ruining the process for every future final grade. It also wound up shining a light on the whole process, and that if the proficiency bar was 55%, why was any other student required to score higher than that to be considered passing? The district notoriously waited to set the measure of proficiency on the exam until after students have taken it, and not surprisingly, the proficiency level was very close to what the average score was district-wide. Over time, I realized that this district, the whole education system, and especially ME, were nothing more than a mere joke. Living in another man's dream, as Dave Chappelle so eloquently put it. Sorry, Juan, anyway. Thank you for watching.